Hello, Perceptionists.
Welcome to Perceptionists Anonymous.
I'm Emily.
I'm Christy Ann. What's up, guys?
Today, we have a really fun topic. I feel like we've been alluding to, we need to do an episode about this like 7 different times throughout the show's history. So I'm excited to talk about Thoth.
Yeah, I mean, well, it becomes more and more relevant. I think the more that we've driven down our freaking rabbit holes of whatever, I mean, seems like, with both of us being writers and with both of us like being involved in the community that we are, I feel like it keeps coming up, and it's like, but it's one of the oldest Egyptian gods. Like, upon doing research for this, I'm realizing, like, not only is he not just like this hip, cool thing, but he's like 7,000 years old, if not older. Like, at least the written depiction of him is, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence too of like him being an Atlantean and like all sorts of stuff with that too. Like there's so much around, and this is the biggest thing with me. So for those of you who don't know, Thoth is an Egyptian god. He's the one that's pictured typically. He's the one that's drawn with the head of the ibis, so that bird with the big long beak. If you're watching,
I know it's so interesting to look at because it's like so skinny, and he's like hella buff and handsome.
Super buff and handsome, but with a beak, which is really interesting. I learned recently the reasons that the Egyptian gods painted the hieroglyphs or images, not the Egyptian gods, the Egyptian people painted their gods with all of their body parts showing except for their profile. I learned why that is, and it wasn't even in this research. It was just kind of like it came up extracurricularly. It was believed that you needed to paint someone with all parts of themselves, or else in the afterlife they'd be missing a part.
Dude, you know what? That's so interesting. That makes me think of the flat hand thing. Like, they don't like to show dimension, and I don't remember why that is, but there was like a really strong reason why, like if you look at their hands, they're always really flat. And maybe that, and you know what? Maybe that was part of it, is because they didn't want them missing fingers and shit.
But then I was like, but why are their faces painted profilely? And that's because they didn't want to have anyone steal their visage off of the walls. So like they didn't want any spirits or anything to steal the actual image of their actual face.
No shit.
Off of a picture. So your actual face could only be depicted like fully in statues or sarcophaguses.
Wow, that is in depth. I wish I cared about anything that much.
I was just like, wow, okay.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, super cool, right? It's totally random, and that just came to mind. But yeah, I learned that's why, which is just interesting. But Thoth has a huge history, and there's so many people that have channeled and worked with Thoth too, and written books off of it. There's a thing called the Emerald Tablet, which we're going to get into. There's so much information about Thoth out there, which I was sitting there and I'm like, okay, but like, why him? Because there's a whole bunch of other Egyptian gods and goddesses that don't get channeled or worked with as much as he does.
You know what I want to say is that, because at least in my research, it said that like in all the depictions of Thoth, it said that he was the person who gave literature to mankind. He gave words to mankind, which is interesting because if you also think about the idea that like they say that psychedelic mushrooms are actually the reason that we invented language as a species, so that's like a whole other conversation. But they say that in all the depictions and all the creation stories, like there's different ways that like he had all these different wives that gave like different like sets of information on how to use them to the people, like Nimaweti and whatever. But he was the one that created the actual language, and that he decided that humanity should have that. And so perhaps one of the reasons that he has, I can't necessarily speak about him being channeled, but the fact of him being written about, scribes were an homage to him. And so the fact that so much was written about him was an honor to him, I would say, because they'd say, I thought this was so cute. It's like, any of the scribes of ancient Egypt, or whomever works with this entity, that they would dump out a little bit of their ink before they would write as an homage to him. And it reminds me of like the one for my homies thing. And so I'm like, I guess that might be part of it, is the fact that they're like, yeah, we are blessed to have the ability to write because of this. So in some ways, let's honor it. But I'm sure that's only like a small part of it.
But it's just really interesting, especially now with like people channeling. I think that what you said makes a ton of sense. So like, I totally agree.
Just logistics.
No, but it makes a lot of sense, and you're totally right. But also like now people channel and have written full books based off of their channeling of Thoth and all this different stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but okay, but like, why not Bast? Like, why is the cat goddess not as strong? Like
she's
why
scary, dude. Have you ever read about Bast?
She's got some intensity. She's intense.
Sekhmet and shit. She's intense. It's like a panther.
She goes back and forth. She's a shapeshifting.
She wants food too.
Right? She likes to be a person from time to time.
Feed me.
But you know, like, it's just interesting. Like, they could probably all give different wisdoms based off of ancient stuff. And I don't know if Thoth is the one. I don't know, maybe if he's just super way more connected,
readily available
to people, wants to be channeled. I don't know, which is just really interesting.
I can see that. Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Just fascinating. You know, I think it's really interesting. So anyway,
have you ever done any work with him?
So that's just it. I don't know.
Okay.
Because there's been times when I've channeled in an energy that when I tune into him now feels very similar. Mm-hmm. But I don't think he's always showed up in the way that I would expect him to. So I don't know if I actually have.
That's interesting. Well, working with Apollo, I'm assuming like those could be different. I mean, I don't know.
Thoth is connected to Hermes. They're very connected energies. So I have worked and channeled Hermes, so I don't know if I'm just sensing in that connection. There's actually a channeling that I read that said that they channeled Thoth and they asked, "Are you Hermes? Like, is that the same entity?" And he goes, "No, but I trained Hermes."
Oh my God, how cool. Interesting. So he's like, oh my God. And so people are calling him like Hermes Trismegistus, and he's like, I fucking guess.
Yeah, he's just like, sure.
like think about how trained Elvis.
Right? Think about how Hermes must feel. Like, are you fucking kidding me? I don't get an identity separate from my teacher? Like, damn.
Right. Oh yeah, that's funny. That's interesting. Right? Whoa. That, you know what, as much of the energy work that I've done, as much of the spirituality that I've progressed in my own personal work, the idea of entities is just like out there, man. I'm like, you know, I'm like, I'm definitely not one of those people that has these like necessary interactions. I am like a synchronicity person. I'm a human person, you know, like I study humans and I study like how we work and how our archetypes work. But like the idea that there's these like bigger entities that care about us, I'm like, okay. You know, I don't have enough information, but for some reason, I'm not one of those people that gets interacted with by them. I get interacted with like with the bigger universe aspect. It's like, hey, you want to see something really interesting that you can't explain to other people without sounding weird? I'm like, fuck yeah, I do. But you know, so
I mean, that could be for a ton of different reasons. Like, we'll go into soul contracts, I guess, in a minute. But that's a totally different episode. But that could be like that could be what you're like, hey, in this lifetime I don't want to be bogged down with entities. I want to just get universal knowings. You know what I mean?
That's interesting. Like, yeah. You know what? Yeah, that's my life path number is 1. So it's like, all right, Christy, let's just do it ourselves.
All alone. 1 is
right. God, weird, huh? Yeah,
you're do a joke.
Oh yeah, do your thing. Do the thing.
Since I just sang a little bit about 1, let's go into that one. So what is Lady Gaga's favorite Egyptian god?
Which one?
Ra ra ooh la la. Okay, I found another one.
I was like just listening to that on the way from work last night. It's like 1 a.m. and I'm all fucking Alejandro.
You know, she's really good at writing lyrics. Like as a lyricist, like if you listen to like is it Bad Romance or right, where you throw the dice or whatever, like everything about it, all the lyrics have like 6 meanings and you're like, oh well, that's pretty fucking cool. Like that's a pretty cool lyricist.
I didn't know she wrote her music. I feel the same way about Taylor Swift, honestly.
Taylor Swift is a fantastic lyricist.
Yeah, in some ways, like I don't some that like the music I like from her I really like, but like listening to her words too. You know what, it's a little off topic, but the idea of country music, like I remember my sister telling me when I was a kid, she's like, when you get older, you listen to country music. And I was like, the fuck I will. And now I'm like, all right, she was right. And I listened to it and they're storytellers, dude. Like Jason Aldean takes you on this whole progressive story. And I'm like, that was awesome. I see it.
Have you ever listened to Casey Musgraves?
No.
Okay. Talk about an amazing lyricist. The first time I heard her stuff, I was like, hold on, I need to listen to this song 6 times just to understand. There's one song, it's called Merry Go Round, and she uses the word Mary in every possible context that you can use the word Mary in, and it is so fucking cool.
Wow. I have the chills.
Like, it's like Daddy's hooked on Mary Jane, mother's hooked on Mary Kay, and brothers hooked on Mary 3 doors down, like and Mary quite contrary, we're so bored until we're married, and just like dust we settle in this town on this broken merry-go-round.
I have the fucking chills.
It's fucking brilliant. It's so good. Wow. It's so good, and all of her songs are that way. So I highly recommend listening to her. She's a country artist, but she's so good.
So Hermes Musgrave, is that what you said?
H.T. Musgraves is her name.
Just kidding, yeah, Hermes. God, take a joke.
Right. She writes all her own stuff too. It's just really fucking cool. So
that's awesome, dude. Very cool. Man, yeah. So
back to Thoth.
Yeah. So I don't know, maybe you discovered this in your research. However, I was thinking that, so we use the word Thoth, and like this is something that's been coming up a lot in my like recurrent life, is thinking about the word, like Germany is not a word. Like Germany's only the English word. Germany is called Deutschland. Like Thoth is the English word. His name was Jehudi. If that's how you say it, you know, how I have it spelled was Djehuty. I mean, it was spelled a couple different ways. So I'm just like, okay, so where did the word Thoth come from, or Thoth?
It is there's a couple different sources on it. One, I actually looked up like the symbol of Thoth because I was just intrigued. And one of the Google searches right underneath that is Thoth Moses. And I was like, what? What the fuck? What is that? The patriarchs who lived in Canaan, so the Canaanites, are basically, they were the ones that Moses came from, etc. Blah 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 blah. But when he spoke of God, he actually used the word for Thoth at first. Moses did, and so it came out as Thoth. It's YHVH.
Yeah. Wait.
And
YHVH. That's Yahweh, dude.
Yeah, but it's actually the word Thoth when you pronounce it differently, I guess. Fucking crazy. So I was like, maybe that's where it came from. There's also a source that says no, it was the Greek's translation of the ancient Egyptian words that produced the word Thoth. I don't know exactly where it comes from, but I was looking into that for that exact reason.
Sure. You know what's interesting to me? So I've been watching Outlander, surprise. And it's so cool because they go into the Revolutionary War, into the America that was before the Revolutionary War, where it was like still tribal land dominated by the king or dominated by the crown, and that you have like, they have all these interactions of like the Cherokee tribe interacting with the Scottish people. And it's like, it's so interesting to think about, what were those initial interactions like when you don't speak another person's language? Like right now we are very blessed, we're very kind of coddled in that way that we can have like translators or whatever, but like before there was that, like it's so interesting. Like you would have to have some really like well-meaning people, like they'd be like, all right, like women to other women, or like warriors to other warriors, like once they get past this like territorial stage, or however any of that worked. And I'm sure it's like per person, per circumstance. But anyway, that's just something I think about all the time. So translation. Oh yeah, the translation of the Bible, all the stuff that we get that gets left out of the translations of the Bible. I was watching this guy named Alan Wallace, or Paul Wallace, and maybe I'll get him on, but that's a whole other conversation.
No, that's super intense. I actually this is again another side conversation. When I was, I think, maybe 13 or 14, we went and we saw the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are just like a book of the Bible that was,
oh my god, I would love to see that.
It was amazing. It was
1945 was a big year for the world.
Yeah, it was in this one obscure museum in San Francisco. It takes tours around the world, basically.
Cool. I saw the Titanic stuff like that.
Yeah, and so we went and we saw them, and it was really interesting because the stuff in the Dead Sea Scrolls, you're just like reading it and you're like, this isn't how the Bible reads. Like, this isn't how it sounds. You know, like this is like a direct translation from this document that I'm looking at. I'm looking at this scroll. Like it's under glass, but you can touch it. It's there. And this is the like direct translation from the document, and it doesn't read the same way that you read the Bible, you know, like it just sounds different. And I've read the Bible, of course, but like, so just really interesting. It was just really fascinating. So me at that time was just like, I don't understand. And so that led into like I went down a research wormhole around like why were these books included in the Bible versus those books included in the Bible, and like what happened, and the amount of like bloodshed that happened over like what would get included in the Bible was just insane. So just really interesting stuff. But yeah, you're right. The translation piece of it is just mind blowing.
Wow. I saw the Book of Kells. That was interesting.
Oh, that's cool.
Like, well, speaking of one of the original Bibles, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I kind of just looked at the artwork of it, but I didn't necessarily read it. Wow.
So Thoth in his Egyptian form, he was the the god. I am so sorry, sir. He was the god of the moon, of reckoning, of learning, and of writing. He was the inventor of writing, the creator of all of the languages, not just the Egyptian, which I thought was interesting. The scribe, the interpreter, and the advisor of gods. And he was the representative of the sun god Ra. So anytime the sun god Ra needed someone to like come talk to the people, he sent Thoth.
I think his creation story was really interesting to me. So this is like, to me, this seemed really graphic, but the idea of like how, like what his you know what I'm talking about, what his creation story was. So he is said to have been born of the seed of Horus, which is the semen of Horus, that was accidentally swallowed by his brother Set, and then he came out of Set's forehead. And it immediately makes me think of Athena. And so I did this research on the idea. I was like, how is this a reoccurring thing? But then again, so Egyptian and Greek, I mean, they have many overlaid similarities, and so there wasn't necessarily like a lot of other similarities between just the forehead thing. I'm like, so accident, like, what an interesting culture for them to be like, this is the only way. That's the only way. But then, and that's something I think about all the time too, is how like mythology gets translated from actual events. Like you think about like these different creation stories that a lot of the Native Americans have, or different like indigenous cultures, of their interpretation of like the Big Bang, and they anthropomorphize it, of course, and they have all these different, like, what is the commonality? Like, what was the event that led to them being like, that must be semen, that's his brother? You know, it's interesting.
Right. Well, and also on that term, like, are we just misinterpreting it?
Oh,
do
yeah,
we just not have
good point.
Words?
I didn't even
like,
think about
do
that.
we just not have the same words? Like, or maybe when the ancient Egyptians, and this one actually feels energetically right now that I'm saying out loud. I've never theorized this before, but I'm getting all sorts of pings from my guides, so I'm going to go with it. What if hieroglyphs had this like 8 different meanings? And so yeah, on a base level, if you're just learning to read the base level, it's this story of swallowing semen and head birth. But maybe if you actually could read it on an energetic level, maybe they had an actual energetic meaning. So the meaning, if you were reading it energetically, was totally different than the meaning if you're reading it like contextually. And we just don't know how we've even lost that ability to do that at our core as a species at this point in time. So we've just lost that ability to even understand energy from words in that way. So I would just wonder if maybe that's what it is, and part of it, you know?
Probably absolutely right. Well, think of it, that reminds me of the idea that like you can have all these different letters put together and it can create a word. However, you can like respell that word with a bunch of different words with a bunch of different letters that have the same spelling. So like, say you have these 2 symbols put together and it could represent this in the grander scheme, but because these 2 are next to each other, or these 2 are next to each other, or they're separated from one another, and I don't even know that's how it works, but intuitively that's what I'm hearing, is that because like there's much more nuance. You're right. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, well, like, even if you think about the way that names are written in hieroglyphs, names are written with like the combination of like 3 different words. And then because it's you put these 3 different words together, basically these 3 different, you know, hieroglyph symbols together, and that forms a new word, but individually they're all still their own separate word. And then like you only know it's a name because you put the cartouche rope around it, and that's it. Like, it's just fascinating.
Yeah, that's so interesting. You know, something I think about quite often anytime that we've done these shows on Egyptian anything, is that we couldn't even read a hieroglyphics until what, like 100 years ago or so.
So the Rosetta Stone, yeah,
dude. And so it's like, and so I think about that because I was watching, I don't know what I was watching. It was just so a bunch of historical like documentation, a bunch of historical like people. They don't know how to translate all these other languages as well, and they're like, yeah, well, think about fucking hieroglyphs. Like, there's no way that any of our ancestors would have known how to do it because we barely know how to do it. You know.
They so just I agree. Like, pretty pictures.
And they're like, damn, they were artistic. And everyone's like, you are not supposed to be here. Like, this is for the king, you know?
Get the fuck out of my tomb.
So like upon doing the research for this, I went into Hermeticism and Hermetic magic.
Dude, I had a feeling you were gonna go there.
I didn't even think about it.
And I was like, I want to go here. And then I was like, no, I have my tab open still with it. But I was like, no, that needs to be its own episode because there's so fucking much.
Yeah, there is. I have the idea of like some of these things that we use in modern day conversation, modern day spirituality, modern day like new age stuff, like as above, so below, the fact that it is drawn from the use of the Emerald Tablet. And I really wanted to read this. Actually, maybe I'll get into that in a minute, but
yeah. Well, I thought that was cool too. I was like, I didn't realize as above, so below came from the Emerald Tablet. And I think I hadn't done a ton of research into the Emerald Tablet before. However, upon doing the research into this, I'm like, I love this fucking thing. It feels so truth. It feels so powerful. I love it. I was just like, this makes so much sense. Like, I don't know. I loved it. So essentially the Emerald Tablet is like a, basically a tablet of a lot of information about the history of stuff. I guess at the core of what I could say is what it is.
But it's not in physical existence. So what information do you have?
Yeah, it's not in physical existence. It's basically like a mythological text that claims a ton of things. There's a whole story with it, basically.
And it says this and not this.
Yeah, like
it's weird.
It's really intense. Sketchy. And there's even a whole story. So the book, The Emerald Tablet, which was published in 1939, is based off of this archaeologist-style person who says that he was put on a mission to basically go find these emerald tablets in Central America because they had been sent by Thoth from Egypt and Greece after the Egyptians. Yeah. After the Egyptians.
The Grand Canyon.
After the Egyptians and the Greeks had transcribed on it, it was then sent and taken by Thoth to Central America. There's a piece with the Grand Canyon. There's a piece with the Mayans, which were a civilization that happened after the Egyptians considerably. So I was a little bit confused on that. I've been watching a lot of documentaries on them recently, actually, which we should do a Mayan mythology one. It's fascinating.
That
would be
that shit all day yesterday.
Right, but then they hid it, and then when the temple and the city got destroyed, the tablets themselves were still hidden. And then this archaeology said he was on a mission to go find them and then translate them, etc., and posted and made a book about it. I don't know what is supposed to have happened to said tablet. It feels like the Philosopher's Stone style thing.
Yeah.
If I had to like nail it down, I'm like, this feels like a thing like that, where it's more of knowledge that's gained and less of an actual physical object that was gained. I'm not 100% sure though, but it's a lot of stuff. It's just really cool to read about though. There's so much information, and it's basically supposed to be written by Thoth about all the truths of the world, essentially.
Yeah, it's so interesting, like, once again, going back to the idea that, like, these gods represent these different characteristics of humanity, and they represent, like, these different interactions with humanity as well. And the fact that Thoth was like you said, he was the intermediary between all these other gods, and he made sure that, like, any of the warring, like, there's a lot of documentation of wars between different gods, and that he was there to make sure that none of them had an upper hand over one another. And he was, was he said to be, that he is the balance, or he is referred to as the equilibrium, and that Maat, and when we did our Egyptian episode, we talked about Maat, who is the orchestration of balance in the universe, but she's also the goddess, and it's said to have been his wife, and that he's not always represented as the ibis, but he's represented as the baboon as well. But when he's the baboon, that is a different incarnation of him, and I think they call it Aeon.
Yeah, it's like his animal form. Like when he's like the god form,
I think, right?
Yeah, he has the ibis head, and then when he's like in his animal form, like his more people form, I guess, almost like his more like concrete form, he is like a baboon.
Well, go on, but
no, which is just mind blowing to me too. And it's that, and then
the idea of humanity.
That's fucking insane. The idea of him being like the Hermes Trismegistus is like a whole other iteration of him too.
Yeah.
You know, which again, that
3
channeling
times.
Right, that channeling says that he's not, and I don't know, I'll read some of the channeling too, because I have it pulled up, because I found like 3 or 4 different channelings that was really interesting around him. But another thing with the Emerald Tablet, even though the physical tablet doesn't exist, there's translations of the tablet that exist, which is really fascinating.
Yeah.
Like Isaac Newton did one. Johannes Petrius did one. He also did a lot of information from like the Spartans, which I thought was interesting. But like, it's just kind of mind blowing. I'm like, okay, so I don't know if we just don't have the knowledge of where the actual thing is, and they did have
the
that.
government has it, dude.
Right? Like, well, they did have that during the Renaissance area because there is so many different translations. There's Arabic translations of the tablet. There's, like Aristotelian translations of the tablet. So in the Greek, you know what I'm talking about. Thank you.
That's just a word I like particularly.
But there's like Latin Roman translations of it, and then
Vatican, dude.
Like, fuck, it probably is just sitting in the Vatican archives, and we just
not even kidding, dude. Absolutely. I mean, why wouldn't it be? Like, that better be the closest friends with your enemy. Keep your enemies close.
Well, yeah, and I mean, the Vatican has done some shady shit too.
Yeah,
like,
well, they have all the information. I mean, I would fucking venture my life upon the idea that they have all the information they don't want us to have, dude.
Oh, yeah.
Like that would contradict all of the papal states, all of the papal whatever,
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway.
I completely think it is. When I was in the Vatican, I had some weird energy pings around that shit. It was weird. It was very intense. I was like, there is some sincere secrets in this place. Like, it just feels like, oh, let's paint every
blood on the walls.
Well, yeah, but like, it also just feels like every inch of the Vatican in the Vatican City is adorned. Every fucking inch of it. Like, every part of it is just beautiful.
Stolen.
And painted. Well, no, like commissioned to be painted.
Sorry, I'm just talking about shit.
Yeah,
Sorry.
well, it's where Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel, but that's everywhere. Like, the Sistine Chapel is not the most impressive thing in the Vatican. It's the fact that to get to the Sistine Chapel, you go through like 18 other Sistine Chapel like rooms. Like, every part of it is adorned. Their post office is painted by a Renaissance painter. Like, it's fucking insane.
That's interesting.
And the whole thing feels like, what are you painting over? What are you covering? Why does everyone need to be distracted in the halls of all of this?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's,
that
gave me the chills. Good point.
Yeah, that's how I felt anyway, walking through it. And again, no hate on any religions or anything like that, but it's just, that's how it felt.
That's really interesting, dude. Thinking about, so like, as we have this duality, like, humanity is known for our duality. And I think that is like such a big thing that we've had to deal with. And maybe that's part of the reason Thoth is such a big part of our history and a part of our interactions with whatever these entities are as well, is because we need to have a way to be able to find this, like he's the Rosetta Stone for like what's in the middle, what's balanced, what creates this sort of balance between things. And in Hermetic magic, like I won't get like too deeply into it, but the idea that it is a science based on duality. It's an art and a science, and it has the idea that the demiurge, which is a relative to, it's the faculties of the human mind, whereas the discerning and analytical qualities are what you aim for in Hermetic magic. And and you have like the subjective spiritual realms, and then you have the objective and material realms. And so they have like, that is specifically ruled over by the idea of Hermeticism.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And Hermeticism is so cool. Like, it's a root and foundation for so many other religions, I think, that just doesn't get included, because there is a lot of that coming up of just like, no, it's the logical thought and the way that the gods rule our thinking in the process.
Philosophy versus practicality. And
yeah, it's really interesting. Random side note that I just want to include in this, because it's a fact I feel is not known and should be known. Archaeologists have found millions of mummified ibis in dedication to Thoth. Millions of them. That is so many birds that people had to take the time to catch and to mummify and then to fucking bury. That's millions of them. Like, oh my God.
Wow. I want to make a joke about it, but I'm like, that's real shit. That's really interesting, dude.
Right. Well, I found that in both Encyclopedia Britannica. I found that on Wikipedia. I found that on what's it called? Ancient.eu. All of them have that like, hey, they've found millions of these mummified birds that people did. Millions of them over thousands of years.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, I wonder what the expanse of time was. I mean, well, think about how many witches they murdered in that 300-year time. You know what I mean? Totally. Like, people want to get shit done, they'll get shit done, I guess. I guess that's just how that works.
The dedication to go find ibises are not small. Like, they're big. They're river birds. They look like blue herons. Like, they're large birds.
That was
so the dedication that people had to take to go find an ibis, catch an ibis, kill it in the sacred way, mummify it in the sacred way, which costs a lot of money, and then bury the thing. I was just like, wait a second, like my brain cannot even comprehend the amount of effort that took.
That's, you know, that's really interesting. That makes me, so whenever I think of Egyptian spirituality, I keep bringing up I keep coming to the idea of Aten, or Akhenaten, where he said he was trying to transition the civilization from being these, like, going to your priest, because your priests are the only intermediaries between you and all of these gods, where in reality, you can overlook the priests, you can overlook all these little gods, and you can go to the primary god, which is the sun god. And that, it's you know, we're living in a period of time where it's really hard to tell what's freaking theory from what's just bullshit, you know, it's whatever. So it's like we have all these ideas. However, they say that Nefertiti and Akhenaten were from Sirius A. And that Sirius A is actually, they worshipped their primary sun, because it's a dual sun system. So they worshipped their primary sun, and so they were trying to bring that to humanity. And so, like, and that in turn shows their flawed interaction with the universe as well, by thinking like they come to us as gods, and then we look to them as gods, when in reality they're just people from their freaking solar system as well, you know. And they're like, well, this is what we do, and you guys don't know what you're doing, even less than we know what we're doing. So that might be,
we're just helping out, we're just giving you some bones. Figuring it out.
And they meant well, you know. He was like, that is why there's so much libel and propaganda against Akhenaten, is because the priesthood's like, the fuck you are, you're gonna tell people they don't need us, like, this is our livelihood, we trained to do this. And then you have the idea of like, none of those people are necessarily bad people either. No. They're just trying to do their thing. They're just like, they had to go to schooling for it. They had a calling. Like, priests have callings, man. Like, that's not something you necessarily go into often, unless that is what you want to do.
Yeah, forever.
Right.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Let me read a little piece of this channeling that I found, because it kind of relates to that.
Sure.
So this is from a channeling from a woman named Ashlyn. She runs, it's like Shasta Vortex tours. Like, she runs like that, which is really interesting. And she's written a book about the Emerald Tablets, and through channeling Thoth. And I think the Emerald, it's something, Emerald Tablets for 2012 and beyond, or something like that is the title of the book.
Interesting.
But I found her channeling, there's a ton of different channelings from Thoth on her website. It's emeraldtablets.net, not .net. And there's a ton of different channelings in there, and I read through a bunch of them, and they're really interesting. But one, I just kind of clicked on the like about Thoth page, because I was like, I want to hear that channeling the most. And so the channeling that I got, this is like a little snippet of it. It's very long. It's very, very long. But he goes into the fact that he was the story told on the 12 Emerald Tablets is when he began to be in physical form on planet during the time of Atlantis, and then from then on. But this little snippet is just really interesting, so I thought I would read it. And again, take it with a grain of salt. This is one person's channeling, but there it is for you. So this is from Thoth directly. So, in order for you to understand more about me, I'd like to say that I am not an ibis or a baboon, and I am also not the writer of the Emerald Tablets. I'm also not Hermes, as described often in ancient documents. And this is the second channeling I found that says he wasn't Hermes. I was the teacher of Hermes when I was in spirit and he was in physical form. The Emerald Tablets were written about me, my experiences, and my innate ability to gather wisdom. They were written by those much wiser than I, who are the observers of all that happen in every minute, minute moment of both time and non-time. I call them the others. I have been asked to be the bridge for this divine wisdom to appear on planet Earth, to remind mankind of their forgotten knowledge so that they can access more wisdom and power. So being a bridge between, it's like the way I've talked about it, how like the universe looks like a layered cake. It's like his layer of cake is well above our layer of cake, but there's still layers of cake above his layer of cake to like bridge the gaps down, which I just thought was really interesting. And I feel like it rings very true for things I've channeled. And it also is just like a really interesting kind of idea around it. And then they talk about how the Emerald Tablets were found and what happened with all sorts of different stuff like in this channeling. So I highly recommend going check it out if you want to read more about it, but it's really interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting. So the idea that he was a lunar god first as well, like what? I guess so. Thinking about the symbolism and the relationship that humanity has with the moon, I mean, it is, other than the sun, it's the only other like external entity that we have. Well, I mean, and the stars too. So sun, moon, and stars. And so I guess, but it is the most closely related to us. and I didn't do any research on how he became a lunar deity, but I feel like everyone's a lunar deity at some point. Like when I was looking into the Athena thing too, I was like, God, isn't she a lunar deity? And I was like, no, she's not technically, but
No.
but to me, I was like, is it everyone? Like, as far as I know, like, anytime I look up anything, they're like, nope, and the moon. Because everyone's like, we don't know what that thing is. So
it was like, there's just a circle in the sky that makes us feel funny. So we're just going to give it a god.
We'll give them every god to be fair, just in case. But so that's interesting. The city. Go on.
Well, I was just saying, I wonder, because when he was considered a lunar deity, Thoth was said to be married to Ma'at, which is like the source of everything anyway, right? Like that's what
they were different though. The goddess and the archetype or whatever.
Right. So it's basically the goddess of magic, etc. So it feels like it's connecting the magic to the moon was what they were trying to do with making him
interesting. Like marrying a family. Oh, yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Because he is, because the god of magic, the god of wisdom, the god of intermediariness, the god of equilibrium, balance, like that's such like a specific set of topics. I don't know. I would love to go back in time and be like, how did you guys just determine like Bastet is a cat? Okay. Yeah. I see the face part, but like, how do you like, I don't know, I guess just watching and analyzing other animals, other species, and then their like more nuanced characteristics as well.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. So I think I'm thinking about the city, the Library of Alexandria, because they say that the Library of Alexandria, though we're never particularly certain that it was a specific place, because once again, it's one of those like mysteries of the ancient world, but I think that it was put in Hermopolis. So Hermopolis is another one of those words that was taken by the Greeks, and it was created, and they, once again, with the translation you're telling me about how it was misinterpreted from Thoth to Hermes being the same interaction, but it was called Kamunu. The city of Kamunu was originally Hermopolis, and Kamunu was dedicated to Thoth. Or Jehudi.
Jehudi, yeah. Thoth and Jehudi are the same. And also Hermes. But yeah, no, that the city was really interesting too, because that was like a central point. That's where they found a lot of the million of ibises.
Gotcha. As well played for show.
Which is really interesting. I'm trying to pull up my stuff on Hermopolis because there's a lot of history around it, which is really interesting. It was during the late period of Egypt, and those gained a ton of prominence because Hermopolis was such a powerful city at the time, and that's where the millions of birds were buried. So obviously it was extra thothy, and
extra frothy. That's all I can hear.
Extra thothy. It's just extra thothy.
Oh my god! Don't ever say that again.
Fine. All right. But that's where a lot of our information of Thoth comes from, is from the excavations around that space and time, because that's where all of the walls were basically, drawn on with his stories and created. Like that was so dedicated. And that could also be why I think a lot of people channel him too, is because there's a lot of information known about him.
Sure.
Where a lot of your gods, there's not, because we have less of extensive descriptions of, as many of the other gods of like Horus or Osiris. Like those gods don't have as much information written about them as those did, because they had like an entire fucking city with millions of birds.
Well, then again, like it wasn't destroyed either. Like we're lucky about a lot about like the Egyptian. So I was watching this thing yesterday when I brought up the Grand Canyon. What I'm talking about is that there's been multiple occurrences of people believing that they have found like thousands of Egyptian monuments in the Grand Canyon, that the government had stashed it down there, or like not just the government, but like who knows what government. It could be a million different governments, that's been down there, and it's been like ultimately hidden away. And now I kind of forgot why I was bringing. Oh yeah, no. So it's been like preserved, but we've been really lucky that the Egyptian history has been preserved, partially because it is so architecturally beautiful, and it is so artistically beautiful. I think like same thing with the Romans, that they were like that. I had a kind of an interesting idea the other day where I was like looking at the Egyptian monuments, and like and I felt bad about this idea because I was like, normally I look at the pyramids and I look at the Sphinx and I think, oh my God, history and beautiful. Then I think, yeah, but it's all like taking up a lot of space. It's like all like this. And I don't know. It's interesting what we preserve and what we don't preserve.
Yeah.
And so that we're lucky to have that.
Well, and also at the time of the building of the Great Pyramids and stuff, that was an oasis. It is not one now.
Interesting. Yeah.
You know, like it was an oasis. You could grow crops right there. You could live there, and it was like comfortable, and there were trees, and you know, it was not the way that it is now, where you look at those pyramids now and you're like, that is just fucking desert. It was not just fucking desert before. It changed over the thousands and thousands of years since those were built. That has drastically changed in so many different ways. There's even I believe Set was credited with creating the Sahara Desert.
Poor guy. He gets credited for a lot of sad shit.
I know. But like, still, it's like, yeah, like there was actually a creation story for this vast desert, which Egypt wasn't in. You know, they were like, yay, we're not near it. You know, we're on this side of the continent. So we're not in the desert really. They were, but it wasn't like the way that we
like, well, it's like
now.
Well, think about high desert. I mean, where I live, this is considered high desert too, but it's like, yeah, we got trees and water and stuff. It's like, yeah, but technically it's a part of it, you know?
Yeah. But you're not necessarily an oasis here, guys, you know? Like, come on.
Yeah. I mean,
but
yeah, that's really interesting. Hermes was said to have written 42 books, dude. So what does the Hitchhiker's Galaxy, whatever that book is, say about the number 42? Dude, it's
the answer to the universe.
Yeah, well, there's been a guy who was able to fucking prove that, and it was like, I think it was written before that book was written. Like, maybe that'd be a cool thing for us to do a show on, was the idea of 42 and the idea of like all this, because it wasn't just the writer of that book, and I don't know, I mean, I'm sure there could be overlap. It could just be like synchronicity. It could just be this guy's like, damn, I'm intuitive. Like me, I'm like, damn, I pulled that number out of nowhere and it was right. You know? But 42, I find that's extremely, because I said it's the books to the answer of everything to humanity in 42 books.
Yeah. That's super interesting. I didn't realize that Hermes was credited with that. It's funny because often when you're actually, you know, I guess in pop culture, like for lack of a better term, or modern culture, Hermes doesn't get a lot of credit for doing a lot of shit. Like when they're like, oh no, he was just the messenger of the gods. Like he's been attributed to just that in so many different things.
Oh yeah, you're right.
And that's so not fair. And I was actually channeling Hermes the other day and talking about the same thing. And he was like basically saying the same thing. Like, I'm not just a fucking messenger. Like that's not what it is.
Well, it's like Paul Revere, dude. It wasn't just Paul Revere. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah. And it's a very similar thing. It's just like people just say I'm the fucking messenger of the gods. That's so inaccurate. Like there's so many other things I did. And being a messenger meant I wrote things down, was a scribe, and being a messenger meant that I like helped all these other things and like all these other different things. It's just really crazy. Like, yeah, it's energetically really interesting to think about these times and channel these times in the world where the way we perceive the world now on an energetic level is so vastly different than with the way that these ancient people perceive the world.
How could it not be, you know? We can't expect to understand it.
Right, and not just because of culture either, but it was just like, you know, the vibration of the planet was so different. Their gods walked on planet. Like they were here. You could talk to them. You could see them. It was something that was not uncommon because these higher vibrational beings could exist because our vibration of the planet was so high, and then it started to plummet and go down, you know, and then now here we are and we're like, oh, they were just ideas and stories, or they were just these things, or, you know, the priests did this, when we really don't have any understanding of any of it.
I think about that with extraterrestrials, and I think about the idea of like the skeptical side of me says, they don't show up now, why would they show up then? And it's like, well, that's not true, because now, like, we can't even differentiate them. Like, there's been hundreds of millions of accounts of all these different interactions that we have. Like, for all we know, we fucking are them. You know what I mean? So there's like all these different, like, everything is so more nuanced than we would like it to believe. And I think that just because, like, we have to be accustomed to growing into these different ideas of ourselves and different ideas of what it would be like, I don't know, we humans are naturally kind of closed-minded because we kind of have to be in a way. I mean, it's a self-preservation technique. We want to understand things, and maybe that's where Hermes and Thoth played such a distinct role, man, is they helped us understand things that we don't understand.
Well, I also just like the idea that at the core, Thoth has been credited with giving people language and writing. I think that's not in, like, the fact that we as a species worshipped that at one point in time is really beautiful.
Because not everyone could read or write, man. You know, thinking about my last name, Clark, like the clerks, some of the only people that could write, you know, and that's like how we get our last names. Like I think about that all the time. Like, what were my ancestors? I mean, albeit my dad was adopted and we're like learning all these different things, but it's, you know, I don't know. I don't know. It's just
my ancestors were the Anders sons. So whatever Anders did, he made a big impact. I don't know what Anders' son was, but
Anders, that's a singer of a metal band.
Well, it's Scandinavian as shit is what it is.
Yeah, it is.
Hey,
dude.
you want to know if you're a Viking? Is your last name Anderson? You were. Like that's
yeah, dude. Man, Hermes, Thoth, we honor your work here. I really do want to do an episode on Hermeticism soon because I have a lot of information on that.
There's so much. It's super cool. I would love to do one too.
Cool.
Well, guys, definitely check out some of the channeling around that too. There's books and stuff from it too. It's super cool. Again, I got a ton of my information from Encyclopedia Britannica, Ancient Religions, LearnReligions.org, Wikipedia, and then of course those different channelings that I mentioned, which is just
library.acropolis.org. Yeah, they have some international resources are out there, you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. But just really interesting. If any of you have ever channeled Thoth or worked with Thoth at all, please let us know. We'd love to know your guys' opinion and thoughts on that as well too. I think that'd be really interesting.
That would be interesting.
And as always, you guys can follow us at Perceptionist Anonymous on Instagram. You can check this out on YouTube if you're not. We have a YouTube, which is Perceptionist Anonymous. You can like us on Facebook. And also, if you have any questions or anything about the episode, or if we got something totally wrong, or if you've channeled Thoth, etc., feel free to email us, perceptionistanonymous@gmail.com. And please give us a review or whatever, depending upon what platform you're on. We really appreciate those. They're really awesome. So thank you again for tuning in. And at the core, we just really appreciate you all. So thank you very much.
Have a beautiful day.
And as always, remember,